Hello and welcome to the Canon Reviewed, a podcast that looks at old books with new eyes and examines their continued relevance to contemporary readers. I'm your host, Daniel, and I'm delighted that you're here. Today, we come to the most famous of Shakespeare's soliloquies and perhaps the most well-known passage from any literary work. Now, that might be an exaggeration, but I'm not sure. But yes, Under the Microscope today is Hamlet's brilliant and emotional exploration on life and death. So please, pull up a chair by the fire and let's talk about to be or not to be. Alright, for the last two episodes, I began by reading the soliloquy in question right at the beginning, before putting it in context thematically and structurally. But I do need to say a few things at the onset before we get into Hamlet's confessional, beautiful, and staggeringly honest outpouring of existential suffering. I just wanted to let you know that in today's show we will be discussing the topic of suicide, for it really is at the heart of it. To be or not to be, that is the question. From the jump, Hamlet is placing life and death in opposition, and he will question whether or not life is worth living. And with that comes the consideration of its premature end. This soliloquy is heavy, and so powerful in its humility and humanity and its sincerity, but it is difficult too. And I just wanted to put this out there for those for whom this topic may be too unsettling or unbearable. Okay, since this incredible speech occurs very near the beginning of Act 3, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about what comes before it. Then we'll hear and break it down line by line. The act opens up with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern informing the king about Hamlet's behavior, telling him that Hamlet admits to feeling distracted, but they couldn't get to the heart of the reason for it. Though the perfect gentleman, he was crafty in his replies and revealed nothing to them. But, they say, he did perk up when Hamlet heard there was an acting troupe coming to Elsinore. Polonius concurs, saying that Hamlet was indeed animated. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are then dismissed, and the king and Polonius turn to Ophelia. As they're about to set their, let's hide behind a curtain and watch how Hamlet acts with my daughter plan into motion. They know he's coming because Claudius sent for him. Now, Polonius tells Ophelia to read a Bible, which would be an excuse for her being alone, and perhaps it would make her seem somewhat guilty for something and vulnerable. Now, before hiding behind the curtain, Claudius speaks to us, the audience, directly, and speaks to this idea of blame and guilt. Now, he doesn't quite admit to anything specific at that point, but he does say he did something bad. We cut now to Hamlet, wandering alone in the corridors, and sometimes I read this scene as though he's cognizant of the plan, that he knows Ophelia is coming, that he will be watched. I mean, he's always watched, but he takes this time, this quiet moment to reflect on his life and his situation. Everything that has happened up to this point has overwhelmed him. His father's death, his mother's hasty marriage to his dad's killer, his own uncle, to losing the kingdom, to seeing his best friend's betrayal, all of it. There's just been an avalanche of terrible things, and so Hamlet, in his complex solitude, wonders. To be, or not to be. That is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing, end them. To die. To sleep no more. And by a sleep to say we end the heartache and the 1,000 natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished. To die, to sleep, perchance, to dream. Aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come. When we have shuffled off this mortal coil, must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. For who would bear the whips and scorns of time, the oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the pangs of despised love, the law's delay, the insolence of office, and the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes, when he himself might his quietus make with a bare bodkin. Who would fardels bear to grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns, puzzles the will and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of. Thus, conscience doth make cowards of us all. And thus, the native hue of resolution is sickly o'er with the pale cast of thought, and enterprises of great pith and moment with this regard their currents turn awry and lose the name of action. I like to read that very slowly because I see Hamlet searching for the words and the ideas. I don't think this is something he'd scripted out beforehand. People don't really do that when they talk to themselves. Rather, these ideas, they're overtaking him, and he's trying to put into words the thoughts that are swirling through his mind and his heart. This is like a purging of sorts, and so I suspect he needs to work through this, finally and compellingly coming to his conclusion, one that is rather unsatisfying for a hero of a play, actually. Now, I don't mean unsatisfying in like a critical way, but that we wanted him to come to it from a more, hopeful place. But it's an honest conclusion, and that he ends by continuing his quest, his very existence. We have to be grateful for his ultimate choice. But let's talk about that when we get there. Okay, so let's return to the soliloquy and break it down by its separate parts. To be or not to be. I mean, that really is the question. Now, we have said before that many consider Hamlet to be the very first pre-existentialist text, and the reason for this comes, really, from the very beginning of this most amazing soliloquy. Now, famous existentialist, and by the way, don't ever call him an existentialist, Albert Camus, wrote a book-length essay called The Myth of Sisyphus, wherein he argued that the only philosophical question one could conceivably ponder was that of suicide. And he came at it from an absurdist perspective, though. So, since the universe was meaningless and our attempts to access that meaning or even make it up was doomed to purposelessness and ridiculousness, why bother living? If all we're going to do with our lives is pretend it's meaningful to exist, deluding ourselves constantly, what's the point? Why go on living? Well, it turns out that living through the knowledge that life is meaningless is absolutely heroic. We go on in spite of it and face the absurd with vigor and creativity. Now, you may notice that this contrasts a bit with what we discussed with Sartre and No Exit. Now there, the individual could make meaning, give their lives purpose and such. Anyway, it's one thing to say, since nothing has meaning or matters, why go on? That isn't what Hamlet's saying. He's wrestling not with existential questions like the individual's access to a greater universal something or other. Nope. Instead, his question is this: to be or not to be? That is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them. See, Hamlet is focusing on suffering, individual suffering, specifically his. Yes, he has opened up the discussion to encompass all of us by asking who would do this, but really, at this point, he's probably looking more inward than outward. He's asking here, what's the more noble choice? To withstand suffering, those slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or just simply end them through one's own act of violence? Now, this opening bit would have shocked audiences back in Shakespeare's day. And we said that last time when he wished he could just disappear, bringing up suicide as a great sin and bemoaning that religious truth. But here he has set two things in opposition, ready to be examined for more study. On one side, there's life, but life equals constant suffering. And on the other side, death. But what's so special about that? To die. To sleep no more. And by a sleep to say we end the heartache and the 1,000 natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished. To die, to sleep, perchance to dream. Now, by equating it to sleep, Hamlet, well, I guess he sort of softens the fear of death. I mean, sleep is a temporary thing, and though Hamlet doesn't mean that, there's something less frightening. But more, this sleep means an end to suffering, the heartache, and the 1,000 shocks that living gives you on the daily. If death is just like sleeping, then it comes with dreaming. A death like this, thinks Hamlet, is something to be devoutly wished. And the fact that he uses religious term is no accident. In fact, he calls death like this a consummation, another term implying a religious acceptance of sorts. But there's something here, though. If it is like sleep, and we can dream, because this means that we can imagine what life after death may be. Aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil? Must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. Okay, so what happens after death, the afterlife, kind of freaks us out. That fear of the unknown is what makes us endure the calamity of so long a life. The respect Hamlet talks about is really more a kind of cheeky, since he's really saying that we put up with unhappiness, and we do so for a very long time because the rub, or the obstacle between the endless peaceful sleep, and is the nature of what dreams may come when we shuffle off this mortal coil. But Hamlet has more to say about human suffering here, and will go on to list a number of things that characterize our everyday existence. And it's not a happy list. How bad must this fear be to allow us to endure it all? For who would bear the whips and scorns of time, the oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the pangs of despised love, the law's delay, the insolence of office, and the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes, when he himself might his quietus make with a bare bodkin? Oh, what a series of things! The whips and scorns of time, oppression, proud people lording it over you, the sting of unrequited love, the eternity it takes for justice, the jerkiness of people in office, and the spurning that good people endure while the unworthy take everything. I mean, this is so now. I mean, do we not have the same complaints? We wonder how some folks have achieved their fame when they possess no actual skills. Hard-working folks take backseats to entitled brats. Gifted artists simply don't have the contacts to make it. Our politicians, God, the less we say of them, the better. Our daily dismissals by those who deem themselves our betters. Sure. Hamlet echoes us here. Life is hard, no doubt. So why put up with it when you can end it with a bare bodkin, which in that time meant like an unsheathed dagger? Now, Hamlet once again utters that thought, turning to us for an answer, for some connection. But he knows why. He knows why we bear those fardels, one of the greatest words of all time, by the way, that means burdens, and continue to grunt and sweat under a weary life. For who would fardels bear, to grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country, from whose bourne no traveller returns, puzzles the will, and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of? So really, then, it's a fear of the unknown that stays Hamlet's hand. No one has ever returned from death to tell us what it's like, and that fact that death remains an undiscovered country puzzles the will, which really means something more akin to bamboozles us to a kind of paralysis. So in a kind of the devil that you know versus the devil you don't, Hamlet says we bear our condition in life as the devil we know, rather than fly off to the mystery that awaits us in the afterlife. Now, Hamlet will end the soliloquy on a more personal observation. Well, personal by first making a global truth that is actually all about himself. Perhaps he finds it comforting to universalize his experience, to say us and we, when in reality this speech concludes with yet another self-condemnation, another diatribe against his ability to do anything. And so, to end. Thus, conscience doth make cowards of us all. And thus, the native hue of resolution is sicklied o'er with the pale cast of thought, and enterprises of great pith and moment. With this regard, their currents turn awry, and lose the name of action. So basically, Hamlet is saying that all this thinking renders us up as cowards. Resolution, meaning taking thoughtful action here, gets candied over by some gross coating called thought. We are born as creatures of action, Hamlet believes, and all this overanalyzing and worrying and imagining the worst, well, that's unnatural. Because of it, great enterprises lose their steam and peter out, like rivers whose course has been shifted. Now, what's weird here is that we know what Hamlet's talking about, and it's hard to suggest or agree with the notion that suicide is a great enterprise. Now, yes, it's a resolution of a kind, but Hamlet must also come to see that it would represent the ultimate failure of his own personal enterprise, that quest bestowed upon him by the ghost of his father. Sure, he believes he needs more proof or whatever, but Claudius wins if Hamlet is out of the picture. Now, over time, I've come to see To Be or Not to Be as more of a contemplation on action versus inaction than a meditation on suicide. It's more like an essay, really. I mean, Hamlet makes the comparison of our fear of death preventing us from taking our own lives to the idea that overthinking things prevents us from doing the things we know we're supposed to be doing. To that end, the undiscovered country isn't death, but maybe what happens after revenge. To be or not to be, while it's certainly asking and contemplating on the big to be, is also about action in general, or rather the consequences of them. The big question marks we can't foresee because we're just too deep in the day-to-day, the suffering and the thousand shocks and all that. When we don't know what to do, we conjure up visions in our minds of a million possibilities, each one scarier than the one preceding it. Now, Hamlet knows this. He's already called himself an ass for these thoughts, for his analytical mind betraying him, turning him into what he sees as a coward, a cowardly fool, too frightened to do what he knows is the right thing. And so, he waits. And waits. And just when he's about to be done waiting, he comes up with more reasons to wait again. So, he hears Ophelia coming, breaks off his monologue, and prepares himself for cruelty, all to protect an act that he just expressed he's rather tired of. Now, next time, we'll discuss this meeting with his girlfriend, the evening's performance in front of Claudius, a weird encounter with his mom, and a sudden death. Things go a little crazy from here on out, so buckle up. Thank you so much for sitting by the fire with me. please rate and review the podcast as it makes it easier for others to find. And if you like what you're hearing and intrigued by where it's going, please consider supporting the show on Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Canon Reviewed. You'll find a few tiers to choose from, as well as an invite to our Discord community. Now, I've begun to slowly put these episodes up on YouTube, so do me a favor and search for the podcast there and subscribe. I'd really appreciate that. Now, look, this podcast is a conversation as much as anything else, so please send an email to thecanonreviewed@gmail.com with your thoughts and observations about the works under study, as I'd love to include them in future episodes. I mean, you've certainly heard this soliloquy before. How does it resonate with you? How does it hit you? Now, I'd like to take a quick moment here to thank our 3 head librarians, Jeff Seplak, Jesse Cunningham, and Jake Frounfelter, for their continued support on Patreon. You 3 are tremendous, and I appreciate you so much. Now, I am super excited for the final reading today. This monologue comes from Claudius just after seeing the play. He takes himself to the chapel and offers up an admission and a prayer. We'll have a lot more to say about it next time, but why I'm really excited is that head librarian Jake will be taking on the role of King Claudius. Enjoy, and I'll see you next time.
Oh, my offence is rank, it smells to heaven. It hath the primal eldest curse upon it, a brother's murder. Pray, can I not, though inclination be as sharp as will? My stronger guilt defeats my strong intent, and, like a man to double business bound, I stand and pause where I shall first begin, and both neglect. What if this cursed hand were thicker than itself with brother's blood? Is there not rain enough in the sweet heavens to wash it white as snow? Whereto serves mercy but to confront the visage of offence? And what's in prayer but this twofold force, to be forestalled ere we come to fall, or pardoned being down? Then I'll look up, my fault is past. But, oh, what form of prayer can serve my turn? Forgive me my foul murder? That cannot be, since I'm still possessed of those effects for which I did the murder. My crown, mine own ambition, my queen. But one may be pardoned and retain the offence. In the corrupted currents of this world, offence's gilded hand may shove by justice. Enough 'tis seen the wicked prize itself buys out the law. But 'tis not so above. There is no shuffling. There the action lies in his true nature, and we ourselves compelled, even to the teeth and forehead of our faults, to give in evidence. What then? What rests? Try what repentance can. What can it not? Yet what can it when one cannot repent? Oh, wretched state! Oh, bosom black as death! Oh, limed soul, that struggling to be free, art more engaged! Help, angels! Make essay! Bow stubborn knees, and heart with strings of steel. Be soft as sinews of the newborn babe. All may be well. My words fly up, my thoughts remain below. Words without thoughts never to heaven go.